Hello, everybody. I've got here Chapter 35 of Book 2 of the Royal Ranger series, The Red Fox Clan. Let's go ahead and get into it. Maddie heaved a sigh of relief as she saw the Abbey's tall tower looming over the treetops. A few minutes later, she reached the clearing where the crumbling old stone building was situated, approaching carefully in case there was anyone around. The clearing was deserted, however, and she glanced around quickly. The door hung open on its hinges once more, and she could see the gaping hole where the stained glass window had been, and the litter of broken glass and lead strips on the ground below it, evidence of her violent exit. She heaved a sigh of relief. She finally had a familiar location from which to head back to Castle Erluin. Then she looked up at the sun, now rising over the treetops, and her heart sank. She knew the daily routine at the castle. The drawbridge would be lowered, and the portcullis opened each morning between the 8th and 9th hour, once the garrison had surveyed the surrounding countryside and ensured there was no enemy in sight. Judging by the sun, it was nearly that time now. Any minute the huge cogs would turn, and the bridge would come down. Damone had said they would assemble at noon for his treacherous entry into the castle. But he would waste no time, now that the fox's secret was known to an outsider. Already, she assumed, his men would be in the forest below the castle, donning the uniforms that would identify them as members of the garrison. No alternative, she said to herself, and turning away from the abbey, she began to jog through the forest. As before, she resisted the temptation to run at full speed. Better to maintain a steady pace and eat up the miles. There was always the chance that Damone could be delayed, and she might make it back through the tunnel in time to raise the alarm. Unconsciously, she began counting her paces in her head to measure the distance she had traveled. She would reach 100 and begin again, the silent cadence matching the rhythm of her feet pounding softly on the forest floor. Her mind kept going over the words Damone had uttered the night before, specifically the threat to her mother. He would kill her, she knew, without the slightest compunction. He intended to seize the throne, and could leave no other claimant alive to thwart him, or to provide a rallying point for any resistance to his rule. He would kill her grandfather as well, and the thought of Damone's threat to the helpless old man made the anger burn brightly within her. She thought about his intention to claim that he had defeated the Red Fox clan and driven them off. Unfortunately, too late for Cassandra and her family. Would her father and Gillen believe the story? Regretfully, she concluded that they probably would, at least initially. They would have no reason to suspect Damone of treachery. He had established himself as a loyal officer and a protector of the crown princess. Horace would be devastated by the death of his wife and daughter, but he would see no reason to disbelieve Damone's story. Neither would Gillen, she thought. His loyalty and his oath was to the crown, and he would continue to serve Damone as commandant of the Ranger Corps. Perhaps neither man would like the situation, but they would probably accept it. Not while I'm around, she repeated grimly. Her presence and her knowledge of his treachery was the one factor that Damone hadn't reckoned on. He assumed she was still in the castle with Cassandra, and he assumed that she would be an easy victim. For the first time, she understood the value of maintaining secrecy over the fact that she was a trainee ranger. Before this, she had thought of it as somewhat melodramatic and unnecessary, but she had gone along with it for the sake of peace and quiet. Also, she had realized that if she resisted the idea of maintaining the secret, she might be barred from her ranger training. At times, the subterfuge had been a nuisance, and even something of an encumbrance, with the whole rigmarole of changing clothing, horses, and identities. But now, she was grateful for it. Then she went back to counting the paces as she jogged through the trees. She might arrive too late, but she had to try. Cassandra was training with Maikaru, It was the first time in days she had had the time to work on her swordswomanship, and she was enjoying the physical and mental exertion that it required. She had sent a servant to look for Damone and to ask him to join her, but the man returned, saying the guard commander was nowhere to be found in the castle. "That's odd," she mused. "I wonder where he's got to." Then she dismissed the question. With the reduced garrison, Damone was kept busy organizing the watch and the daily routine of the soldiers under his command. She couldn't expect him to be available to drop everything and attend to her when it suited her. Maikeru's wooden practice sword tapped her painfully on the shoulder. "Pay attention to your drills," he rebuked her. "A wandering mind is dangerous. You must concentrate. Now begin again." She rubbed her shoulder and bowed in apology for her distraction. Then she assumed her fighting stance and advanced on him, striking left and right in a sequence of high, low, low, high attacks. Then, after the final high, she smoothly reversed the sword and leapt forward, stepping with her right foot and following up in a one-handed thrust. Maikeru's sword just managed to deflect the point of hers at the last moment. He stepped back, indicating the sequence was over, and lowered his sword. He nodded approvingly. "That was good, my lady," he said gravely. "You have eliminated the movement that warns you are going to thrust. I take it you have been practicing in private." "You still managed to parry it," she said, slightly aggrieved. His lips moved in a thin smile. "I have been a student of the katana for over 40 years, my lady," he said. "Your strike would have succeeded with most opponents." She grunted. She knew he was right, but she had a competitive personality. Just once, she wanted to best her mentor in a mock duel. Then she laughed at herself, knowing just once wouldn't be enough. If she managed it once, she would want to do it again, and again. She stripped off her gloves reluctantly. She had enjoyed the workout, but knew she couldn't stay away from her desk any longer. She felt the floorboards trembling slightly beneath her feet, and was aware of a low background rumble that told her the massive gears controlling the drawbridge had been disengaged, and the bridge was coming down. That reinforced her decision to get back to work. "Must be past the 8th hour," she said. "It's high time I was at my desk." Maikeru eyed her thoughtfully. "You work too hard, my lady," he said. She looked tired, he thought, and he could see a few gray wisps in her blonde hair. She laughed. "The work doesn't do itself." Maikeru took both practice swords and returned them to the rack along the wall. Then he gathered up the padded vests and gauntlets they had worn for the session. "There's been no word from the north?" She shook her head. "Nothing so far," she said. "We all assumed they'd be back within a few days. Obviously, it's taking longer than we expected." The door to the practice hall opened, and a young page entered, looking nervous in the presence of the Princess Regent and her inscrutable instructor. The castle staff told wildly imaginative tales among themselves about the unsmiling Nihonjan warrior and his uncanny skill with the katana. Not all of them were inaccurate. "What is it, Richard?" Cassandra asked, smiling to put him at ease. "My lady," he said, addressing her, but with his eyes constantly flicking to glance at Maikeru, as if expecting him to perform some amazing feat of swordsmanship while he watched. "The sergeant says to tell you there are men approaching the castle." "Men?" Cassandra asked, instantly on the alert. "Are we under attack?" Richard smiled reassuringly. No, my lady. My apologies for alarming you. They're castle garrison troops." Cassandra's face lit up. She looked at Maikeru. "It's Horace and Gillen," she said happily. "They're back." But again Richard demurred, his face thoughtful. "I don't think so, my lady," he said, and he was sorry to see her face fall, the glad expression extinguished. "They're coming from the south. Captain Damone is leading them," he added, by way of further explanation. "Damone?" she said again, puzzled. Why would he take men to the south? Richard shrugged. He had no answer for that, and she realized that there was no reason why he would have. He was just a page, delivering a message, after all. "I'll come and take a look myself," she said. He stepped aside as she swept past him. Maikaru followed close behind her, his soft-shoed feet making no more than a whispering noise on the flagstones. Richard, a little peeved that he couldn't answer her question, tagged along behind. They crossed the courtyard that stood between the keep and the outer wall, quickly mounting the stairs that led to the battlements. Cassandra ran up the stone steps to a vantage point above the drawbridge. Hearing her coming, the sergeant in charge turned to greet her, then pointed an arm to the forest south of the castle. "There, my lady," he said. She moved to a gap in the battlements and peered downhill. There was a relatively large body of men marching up through the park toward the castle. They were all dressed in the distinctive Heirloom livery, a red surcoat over chain mail, and a polished, cone-shaped helmet with a mail aventail hanging from the back to protect the wearer's neck. They carried shields, painted red with a yellow X superimposed, and the morning sun glittered off the points of their long spears. A mounted officer led them, and although it was too far to distinguish his features, she thought she recognized Damone. It was certainly his chestnut horse that the rider was mounted on, and his shield carried Damone's distinctive owl's head symbol. "They look like our men," she said. "But where did they come from?" She looked quickly around. She could see half a dozen troops on the battlement catwalk, and another 3 in the courtyard below. 9 men. There would be another half-dozen in the barracks, having come off duty from the night watch. All in all, she had been left with 25 men to hold the castle. Not a lot, but sufficient, considering the strength of the walls and the castle's defenses. Now, she could see nearly 30 men marching toward the drawbridge. Where had they come from? And why was Damone leading them? If it were, in fact, Damone, anyone could carry a shield with his symbol on it, and the horse, although it looked like his, could well be any chestnut. She hesitated, suspicion growing in her mind. She looked at the sergeant, but this sort of situation was above his level of competence. He was essentially a man who followed orders. Maikaru was a different matter. He had a cool, analytical mind, and he wasn't a person who saw what he expected to see. "Maikaru, what do you think?" she asked. The old swordmaster had been expecting the question. "We don't have that many men," he replied, "and that may or may not be Damone-san leading them." The sergeant looked at the two of them, alarm evident on his face. He had simply assumed that the men approaching were bona fide troops belonging to the castle. "My lady?" he said uncertainly. "What do you want me to do?" Cassandra came to a decision. "Raise the drawbridge," she ordered. "If we're wrong, we can let them in later." But it was already too late. The rider leading the group had spurred on ahead and was nearly at the bridge. The sentries there stepped out to stop him, then hesitated as they recognized him. The hesitation was fatal. The rider drew his sword and cut left and right, killing them where they stood. Then he galloped across into the gatehouse, a massive fort-like building that housed the drawbridge and portcullis mechanisms. Behind him, the marching body of men broke into a run, following him across the bridge. Any minute, they'd be pouring into the courtyard. Cassandra turned to the sergeant. "Sound the alarm. Send word for the men in the barracks, and get all our men into the keep," she ordered, and headed for the stairs at a run, shouting to the men in the courtyard to form up on her. The sergeant hesitated, not sure what to do. Maikaru stepped close to him. "Do as she says," he ordered. "We're under attack." All right, that's going to be the end of Chapter 35. Thank you for listening. I'll see you all next time in Chapter 36. God bless, and have a good one.